what our worth is, so to speak, which I'll talk about in a minute. In other words, while we're looking at work to get a wage, that's my wage, my reward, if you would, is I'm working. God is saying, no, I never called you to work for me. I never made you an employee. I made you a son. And as a son, you have value. And the way your value is worked out in this life, the way your worth is worked out is just like mine. You work with the Father. I tell people all the time, if you go to work for money, you're going to be a miserable git. I tell you right now. If you go to work with the Lord, and you know that's the place He has you working, and you're working with Him, it changes everything. There's something Jesus is all over the place, I believe anyway, as He goes into this parable. He's hitting on a variety of different things. It's all coming out of the rich young ruler, filtered through Peter, wondering, what am I going to get out of this? And he's starting to sound a bit like the elder son in the prodigal. You know, I've worked for you all these. I never called you to work for me. You're my son. I asked you to work the field, work the farm with me. All of it's yours. All that I have is yours. How much more do you want? Jesus can hear the elder son, the rich young ruler, the Pharisees in Peter. And He doesn't rebuke them, which is what I like about it. He promises him a future, He promises him a present, and then He gives him a parable to help Peter see the way the world looks at things and the way Jesus looks at things, the way the king looks at things in His kingdom. And they are very, very different. Verse 30 of chapter 19 leads us into the parable. But many who are first will be last, and the last first. For the kingdom of heaven is like, it's a terrible place for a chapter break, by the way. That really should flow, because this is flowing with what Jesus said. You have a future, you have a present, but I need to tell you that the first will be last, and the last will be first, kind of thing. For the kingdom of heaven is like a landowner who went out early in the morning to hire laborers for his vineyard. Now when he had agreed with the laborers for a denarius a day, he sent them into his vineyard, and he went out about the third hour. So he started at 6 o'clock in the morning, and now he's going out at 9 o'clock, the third hour, and he saw others standing idle in the marketplace, 9 o'clock in the morning. And he says to them, you also go into the vineyard, and whatever is right I will give you. So they went. Then he went out again about the 6th and the 9th hour, which would be 12 o'clock and 3 in the afternoon. I mean, the day's wearing on here. And about the 11th hour, which is 5 o'clock in the afternoon, he went out and found others standing idle and said to them, why have you been standing here idle all day? And they said to him, because no one hired us. He said to them, you also go into the vineyard, and whatever is right you will receive. So when evening had come, which would have been an hour later, 6 o'clock, the owner of the vineyard said to the steward, call the laborers and give them their wages, beginning with the last to the first. And when those came who were hired about the 11th hour, they each received a denarius. And when the first came that supposed that they would receive more, they saw the guys at the end get the denarius. That's what I agree. Hey, And they likewise received a denarius. And when they had received it, they complained against the landowner, saying, these last men have worked only 1 hour, and you made them equal to us, who have borne the burden and the heat of the day. He answered one of them and said, friend, I am doing you no wrong. He calls him friend. Did you not agree with me for a denarius? Take what is yours and go your way. I wish to give this last man the same as to you. Is it not lawful for me to do what I wish with my own things? The answer, of course, is yes. You have a right to do whatever you want with your things. Okay. Or is your eye evil because I am good? So the last will be first and the first last. For many are called, but few chosen. Isn't it funny? We identify with the one who feels like he got ripped off. That parable really messes with people's heads because it can be looked at in such a human, earthly way. And our conception of right and righteousness is not the same as God's. He's talking to Peter, but he's saying a lot more. He kind of gives a quick scope of church history by the fact that he takes a day and he breaks it down into what church history has looked like. In other words, the first one that went out there represents, like religion and law, the Jews who made an agreement with God. They were in a covenant relationship. They made an agreement with God. And it was a very clear arrangement and agreement for a denarius a day. You probably picked up that when he went back out at 3, 6, and 9, he didn't agree on a denarius. He said they would receive what was right. Now he knows he's going to give them a denarius, and they go out and work, not knowing what that means. So they're not working for money. They're not working for a denarius. They haven't made an agreement for a denarius. They've made an agreement with the landowner. And he's given them his word that what will happen to you, what you will receive, is what is right. So you're going to have to go out and work by faith. That what I say, that I am a righteous man, and I will give you what is right, whatever that is. That's a different situation than somebody who's made an agreement with God. Well, I do this and you do that, right? That's a very religious, legalistic approach to the relationship, which we said earlier, you can't love legalistically. It has to be relational. The second group of guys have engaged this landowner in a different way. He says he'll give them whatever is right. Verse 6 of the parable.
And about the 11th hour he went out and found others standing, and he said to them, Why have you been standing here idle all day long?
I don't know if you noticed how many times idleness was mentioned in the parable. And it's funny because it's all over the place. I don't even know how many times. And we just never hear it. Or maybe you did. Maybe you all picked up on it every time he said it. But by the time he gets to the 11th hour and he says, why have you been staying? Now, the answer cannot be because we're lazy. Because they wouldn't be in the marketplace. The answer is exactly what he said to them. It's sort of like the crippled guy in John 5. There has been no man to put me in the water. These guys are saying, I've been here all day and no one has hired me. The difference is that their length of time has been a much shorter time, which is what the first guys moan about, is how much money they got for such little amount of time. But you see, the landowner, Jesus, our Father, is operating in a different place. He looks at every person and he sees their worth in this place called earth, in this vineyard, in this field. He sees every single person. The desire is for them not to be idle. In a way that people, all of us in here, have experienced this when we have been working someplace and have been made to feel worthwhile for what we're doing. And when we are, none of us are thinking, oh, I am so glad that I'm making $12.50 an hour. Quite frankly, it doesn't matter what we're making. Something has just happened. It makes money pale. It's called our own sense of worth. This landowner, he needs these people to go into the vineyard for the last hour like he needs 2 holes in the head. He doesn't need for them to do that, but they need to do it. They need to get out there. They need to work, not for wages, but because of their own worth. They're not supposed to be idle. They all have worth, whatever time of day. You see, Jesus reveals to us that it's not about work and wages. It's about worth and rewards. We're not working for God. It's not about possessions, but about being possessed. That's what Paul calls us. Question, are we trying to own God, or are we going to let God own us? You see, the reward is the work itself. And that's what Jesus is looking at Peter. Friend, this is what Jesus is doing. He's saying the reward is in the work. And if you follow me and work with me, you will find your own worth in the work, in yourself, in me. Everything's going to change for you. You will never ask, what are we going to have? You will inherit all things, because that's what my sons do. They inherit all things. They don't work for anything. They inherit it as a son. You see, because this is really, we're not day laborers. If we were, it wouldn't be such a bad thing, quite frankly, because at least you have food for the day. That is a kingdom principle. Now, I'm not against using money and pension plans. I'm not talking about that. There's a dynamic in daily provision, in living each day, because that's what you got. What we got is what we got, and to enjoy. It's a daily provision. It's kind of interesting. You know, Jesus is talking about sonship, and he has to with Peter, because if he gets the sonship thing right, then he doesn't compare himself to a day laborer and asking what his wages are going to be and what he's got. You know, none of that stuff even enters into the conversation. Something you may not have looked at this way before. In Matthew 22, do you remember? It's the Pharisees with the Herodians, and they want to know if it's lawful to pay taxes to Caesar. And Jesus knows they're trying to trick him. It's a test. And he calls them on it. But then he does an interesting thing.
But Jesus perceived their wickedness and said, Why tempt me, ye hypocrites? Show me the tribute money. And they brought him a penny. And he said unto them, Whose is the inscription that's image and superscription? And they said unto him, Caesar's.
It says they come testing him. He challenges them. What's the next thing he does? He asks for somebody to please give him a coin. He doesn't have one. It's like so simple, it's ridiculous. What would I be doing with a coin? That's not my, I'm not here working for money. And then there's a tremendous teaching. Whose image do you see on it? Because I'll tell you what, where you see my image on you, you belong to God. If you see the image of Caesar, give it to him. Of course he would, because sons don't work for, they work with the Father in love. You see, it all started back in the rich young ruler. If you want to be perfect, if you're going to inherit, it's all been about sonship instead of being a day laborer. As it really winds down, you see bottom line, grace. I want to be good and generous and shower grace on people. I asked before the question, why is it we identify with the person who's moaning and complaining because they feel like they got gypped. And you know I love you, and I love me, and I love Barney and everything else. I love you. So don't take it the wrong way when I say because we're still legalistic. We say, this is not right. Well, God thinks that being generous and being good and being gracious is always right. If you're working for money, then maybe you'd say, it's not right. And it still is right. He didn't gyp anybody. He says to them, you made an agreement with me. You wanted to follow religion and the laws and all that. So get on with that. Do that. The guy at the end of the day didn't have a shot. So I was gracious. Does that upset you? Are you going to let my goodness separate us? Or are you going to rejoice with me like the father in the house when the prodigal comes home, who experiences grace? Because of the Father's goodness, because of the Father's grace, because of the Father's generosity. Bring out the robe, bring out the sandals, bring on the ring, bring the fatted calf. Let's do this thing, man. Are you kidding me? Israel came first. The apostles, grace, if you would, came last. So he's saying the first shall be last, and the last are first. He's talking on so many different levels, Jesus. It's a very, very cool kind of parable the way he does the whole thing. But so we don't get screwed up. What John sees in Revelation is the old and the new, the first and the last. 24 elders around the throne, the 12 tribes of Israel, the 12 apostles. They're all sitting together around the throne. So don't get hung up on the first and last. That's kind of like just don't let it bother you. Just get on with it. But he is saying to the first, I really would like you to stop moaning and complaining about the grace that I have bestowed on the last. I'm still trying to figure out the power thing here, because what we've really been talking about is possessions really in the form of money. And I said it in the beginning, in the middle, and again at the end. Money's not a problem. It's powerful. It's when we actually put our trust in it, if you would.